Thank you for this day, Spirit. Thank you for this day. Thank you for this day, Spirit. Thank you for this day. Healing, this healing, this healing, this healing day. This healing, this healing, this healing day. This beautiful day. Thank you for this day, Spirit. Thank you for this day. Thank you for this day, Spirit. Thank you for this day. This beautiful, this beautiful, this beautiful day. This beautiful, this beautiful, this. I'm very honored to be here. I want you to know that I was at the very first Sunday service that Reverend Abigail gave in the other location, right? And so this center has a very special place in my heart. And as Elliot mentioned, today's topic is diversity. And we hear about diversity a lot today, not only through our spiritual awareness, but in social media and on and on and on. And often the way we talk about diversity is with categories, and usually a few categories like age, race, religion, gender. And what I want to do to begin with is start with a much, much broader perspective. For as our affirmation says, I believe that we are rooted in one life. And this one life creates limitless variety, limitless diversity. This diversity actually reflects the nature of God, the source of all that is. And diversity reflects the infinite potential that is just always creating. So, diversity is, that's it. Diversity is. And it's all good. When we think about diversity, as I mentioned, we think about these categories. But I'm going to start first with nature. So when you begin with nature, think of mountains and hills and prairies and deserts and rivers and lakes and streams and sun and the types of weather, sleet and snow. There's a huge ecosystem out there of a myriad of representation of diversity. And then when you add into that species, who can tell me how many species scientists think are on our planet today? Anybody? A guess is great.
1,000,000.
1,000,000. Much more. Exactly. Scientists a couple of years ago decided that there were actually 1 trillion species on the planet today, and that they have actually understood or described 0.001% of them. So if we, let me give you some numbers. Plants, there's 390,000 species of plants. And by species, what we mean is the ability to cross-pollinate or interbreed. In terms of insects, there's 950,000. In terms of animals, species, there's 1 to 2 million. And I was sitting there thinking about that. I am not sure how many animal species I could actually list. Maybe, I don't know, 50? Maybe 100? I don't know. I kind of think I would be lucky if I could list 50. So that shows you the magnitude of diversity if we just think about nature itself. And this biodiversity is good. This biodiversity is actually inherent in life itself. So with the richness of biodiversity, it brings along the ability to maintain soil, to purify the air, to clean water, to regulate climate. It recycles nutrients, which then give us food and raw materials and what we need for medicine for our health. So in reality, biodiversity and the richness of it is the foundation of civilization. So that brings me to us, people. We are one species, Homo sapiens. You would think we could get along, right? So when we talk about diversity, we talk about cultural diversity. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we usually bring up categories like age, race, religion, gender. Today we're talking more and more about gender identity. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong, good or bad, about the diversity categories that we have. It is pretty simplistic. When we want to broaden that idea, sometimes what we do is bring in national origin, family origin, marital status, work experience, political beliefs. There's even more diversity as we think about ourselves and as we start getting to our own uniqueness. So I looked up in Wikipedia, the source of all things, right? And it lists 342 hobbies. So when we think about our spiritual essence and our passions, we all have different things that we love to do. Who in here loves cooking? Oh, there's actually a lot. What do you like to cook? What's your passion?
I like to bake.
You like to bake.
Yeah.
Somebody else? John?
Lots of seasoning flavors that come together. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
I've never tasted that before. In a good way.
So baking and seasoning flavors. Who else? Yes. Soups. Yes. Granola. Kathy.
Main dishes.
So look at that. Look at those answers. Cooking is one category, and everybody had a different answer. The reason why I'm going through all of this is I think if we kept going about things, you would actually understand that we are unique beings, every single one of us. And that's exactly what we say in the Science of Mind. We are each individualized, unique expressions of the divine. No two of us are alike. And just like biodiversity is good, cultural diversity is good. We don't hear that often today, but we know that in this philosophy. Studies, though, are being done that show that when a diverse group of people, that means just people that are different from one another, come together in a unified goal, it actually brings about more flexibility, more creativity, more innovation. And that's really being spoken a lot in the business world. They talk about the unity in diversity, improving teamwork. And that's because when you bring people together that are different from one another, you're bringing together different knowledge and different experiences. So, why then do we have all this chaos today? We probably all have many answers to that. I'm going to start with the idea that it begins in part with our brain. And we hear about this in the mass media, that our brain is actually wired to keep us safe. And it's wired such that we can see something and we fill in the blanks and we judge it so we know whether to fight or to flee. So it's survival. It's part of the evolution of our intelligence. I actually, as an aside, found out that the reason why human beings don't like spiders is because they have 8 legs, and that we actually see those 8 legs, and that generates fear in us. And I thought that was so amazing that I've learned to love spiders and take them outside, but it's an interesting thing about our brain. So when we were being socialized as human beings in tribes, this kind of thing served us well. But today, as we hear, it doesn't serve us well. In fact, it's bringing about a lot of chaos. But what's happening is our unconscious mind, that 90% of our brain activity, is now what we're talking about. And with that, there are several studies that are talking about the different diversity aspects and the influence on us. We know that beliefs and things like that personally, we uncover our beliefs and then we learn who we are. And I think in our society today and in the science of mind, we're moving from a personal place of uncovering beliefs to now a social place where we're starting to recognize that there is a collective unconscious that's affecting us. One study looked at the names of hurricanes, and it found that hurricanes with female names are seen as less threatening. Think of Hurricane Katrina, less threatening and dangerous than those that have male names. And so people actually don't prepare as well. They don't take as many precautions. They don't evacuate as much when a hurricane has a female name. And that actually blew my mind, that there is gender bias reflected in us trying to keep ourselves safe. Interesting. Collective unconscious. In the 1970s, there was a joke that was going around, which you may be familiar with. And it goes like this. A man and his son got in a car accident and were brought to the hospital. The doctor that was examining the boy said, "I can't operate on him. He is my son." And the question is, how can that be? How many of you are familiar with that? Somebody not familiar with it, do you know what the answer is? The answer is that the doctor is the boy's mother. So in the 70s, right, this was brought up as part of the feminist movement and things like that, and it was kind of an aha moment. Well, today, authors Mahareen Banerjee and Anthony Greenwald wrote a book called Blind Spots, The Hidden Biases of Good People. And they have found that even though we have gone through, as demonstrated here, 40 to 50 years of a renewed, heightened feminism talking about gender bias, still 80% of the people don't know that answer to that joke, and it's an aha moment for them. The good news is, though, that these same authors have found out that our conscious mind, so that 20 to 30% of our mind does believe in egalitarian values, that we don't consciously want to judge based on skin color, on age, on height. But what we're learning today, when we look at our collective unconsciousness, is that we do have more work to do. So, the good news is actually that we are experiencing this chaos that is bringing about a cracking open of our unconscious, of our subconscious. We may think we think like others, and that when we're in the same situation and confronted with the same facts, that we think the same, but we're finding that we don't. And we may think that we experience the same feelings as other people, but we're finding, especially based on the diversity of who we are, that we can't assume I feel the way that you feel. And there are studies being done that are realizing that our collective unconscious is actually building bias and judgment into our institutions, such as education, healthcare, and prisons. So I'm not here to talk about that from a social and political perspective. My message this morning is now is the time for us as individuals and a society to talk authentically about diversity. So, what is mine to do in this topic of diversity? What is it that I need to become to be spirit in action that creates a world that works for everyone? I think we begin with, again, reminding ourselves that these diversity elements, these categories, are not good or bad. It's when we put judgment on them, when we say something is lesser than or better than, that this chaos starts. Remembering that. So we always start from oneness, right? We start from knowing that we are all connected, that love is the only power. We are one. And when we live our life from that truth as a starting point, which is what this philosophy is, what happens is then we demonstrate love and respect toward living beings and things. So with that oneness, though, we can't stop there. Sometimes we might have an inclination to say, we are all one. I don't want to bring up things about diversity. We're all the same. In reality, we are all different. And Tracy Brown, who is the head of the CSL Leadership Council, she says it this way: ignoring diversity is ignoring how God shows up in the world. And I love that. I really love that. Okay, so we start with oneness. One of the next things we can do is listen deeply. We can listen to ourselves. This is why we meditate. We meditate so that we can open up our awareness, our own unconscious, and start hearing our own inner dialogue, right? We know this. Change your thinking, change your life. What we need to become aware of is our prejudices. And by prejudices, I mean our prejudgments and assumptions. The next thing that we do is listen to others deeply. What is their experience? And we really hear to try to understand. So I'm going to give you an example of that, which is an example of diversity around age. And this has to do with my parents. So my parents are in their 90s. And for the last couple of years, my brother and sister and I have been talking to my parents because they still live in the home that I lived in when I was 15. So it's a big home. It's got lots of bedrooms. It's got a big yard. It's got a swimming pool. And we see what it takes for my parents to maintain that house. And so the initial dialogues that we had with them was, we want you to be safe. Wouldn't you like to be in an independent living location where you could have social activities, you wouldn't have the burden of the garden and cleaning the pool and things like that? That did not go over well. I will tell you, that was not what my parents wanted to hear. And my mother especially, and she knows I'm talking about this, she got angry. And then what kicks in for me is my childhood stuff. When my mother gets angry, I would go away. Fortunately, I've learned other tools around this. And I've recognized that the dialogue had to be different. And I had to listen to what my parents were saying. They wanted to live independently. They wanted to control their own life. And they felt they weren't hurting anybody by doing this. And to be honest, that's true. That's true. As long as they are staying safe and as long as they're keeping around the safety of others is okay. To be honest, there's no reason why they can't be in their home. It makes me feel uncomfortable at times, but it's not about me. It's about them. And so now that has shifted the way I talk to them. Instead of saying, shouldn't we do this or shouldn't we do that or wouldn't you like this, what I do is have a conversation around how can I support you in what you want to do, which is live in your home. So recently, my mother and I have started talking about experimenting with Uber and Lyft so that when my father stops driving, they will already know what the solution is. So listening deeply, coming from oneness. The next thing we need to do, I believe, is to ask questions and not be afraid of those questions that are hard. And I know around race, I have difficulty asking questions, not of people of different color that I know well, and not actually of people that I don't know at all. There's kind of this middle group where I am concerned I'm going to either anger them, embarrass them. And so we have to get into this dialogue where we have courage and vulnerability to ask questions so that we learn more. Tracy Brown, who I mentioned before, she says we should give ourselves a learner's permit. She is African American and talks about the kinds of questions that we could be asking, and then says to be gentle with ourselves because we can have a learner's permit and know that we're practicing and maybe we're doing things wrong, but it is the thing that we can do to understand more. So start with oneness, listen deeply, ask questions. Another thing is to actively put yourself in situations where you are different. Where you are different. Because that is the best way to start maybe not experiencing directly what somebody else is feeling, but you will get a much, much better picture than if you're just reading something or listening to the media. I have an example of this which really changed my life. I was visiting my daughter out of state, and it was when the murders of 9 people of color in a black church happened in Charleston, Virginia. And I decided to go to a center for spiritual living where my daughter lived. And so I picked a center and I went in, and I was one of probably 4 or 5 white people. And there were probably 20 black people. And because it was like a community like this, right, small, and this horrific incident where a young white supremacist had just out and out murdered people, what happened is that Sunday message actually became a dialogue, a conversation. And I felt like I was listening to their private conversation. I heard their anger, their pain, I can feel it today, their despair, their frustration. I learned more in that hour than I could have ever learned by reading a newspaper or asking a question, actually. I recognized that day that there was no way that I knew what it meant to be a person of color walking through this world. And it's totally affected my life and how I approach it. So, start with oneness, knowing our oneness, and that we all want love. Listen deeply. Ask questions where you have to be vulnerable and courageous. Put yourself in situations where you are different so that you can learn what the experience is. By practicing mindful appreciation of our diversity, we will grow in our humanity. So I want to close then with a quote by Ernest Holmes, which Deanna's song in many ways summarized, I think, what I was talking about. Thank you. And so does this quote by Ernest Holmes. Everything in the universe is a unique, individualized, or expression of the one thing that is the cause of all things. No 2 blades of grass are alike. No 2 grains of sand, no 2 thumbprints, no 2 of anything are alike. and nothing ever exactly reproduces any other thing. This means that the one ultimate cause is pressing against every individualization, flowing through it or him or her. Another way that Ernest Holmes says it is, behind all is a unity. Through all is a diversity. Saturating all is a divinity. Diversity is an integral part of the divine plan. Let us pray. Take a deep breath in. And know that in this world of oneness, there is this thing that is indescribable, this thing I call God. It is the one power, one life, one love, the source of all being, the source of all form. And I know that I am that form. I am that expression. All of us are that expression of the divine being. And we reflect our own unique individuality in so many beautiful ways. I know that today we bring those ways into miracles. As we walk out this door, I know that we honor every single aspect of one another, knowing that we are meeting that individual, that sentient being, as a godlike person. They are godlet, and we are in relationship with God itself. And so I'm so grateful for this morning, the time together that we've had, the ability to share my experience. And so I just surrender and let this word go into the action of the law, knowing that all is well, all is truth. And together we say, and so it is.